On my birthday, amidst the neon glow of the corporate gala, my fiancé knelt down, but not for me. He looked up at another woman, reciting a well-rehearsed proposal before hundreds of our colleagues. Everyone cheered. I simply smiled and raised my glass, because I'd set this stage myself. They didn't know that as the diamond flashed. The building's lights were set to die in 3, 2, 1, and the truth was about to play on the screen behind him. My name is Rowan Pierce. I'm 31 years old, and as the head of internal investigations at Halcyon Meridian, I am paid to see the things people think are perfectly hidden. I find loose threads, follow money trails that have been scrubbed clean, and translate the silent language of corporate guilt. Tonight, however, my skills were being applied to a more personal project. The party was held in the grand atrium of the Halcyon Meridian Tower, a cavernous space of glass and steel in the heart of Westbrook Heights. The city glittered below us, a galaxy of distant lights that made our own celebration feel like the center of the universe. A colossal banner stretched across the mezzanine, a testament to corporate schizophrenia. In sharp, official font, it declared, Q4, Breakthrough, Exceeding All Expectations. Sewn awkwardly below it, almost as an afterthought, were silver mylar balloons spelling out, Happy Birthday, Rowan! The effect was jarring, a clumsy attempt to merge professional ambition with forced personal warmth. It was the perfect metaphor for my relationship with Beckett Hale. The air was thick with the scent of expensive catering and the low hum of forced networking. Colleagues drifted in clusters, their laughter a little too loud, their handshakes held a fraction of a second too long. I navigated the room with a practiced smile, accepting birthday wishes that felt like status updates. I saw the heads of sales and logistics locked in a hushed, intense conversation by the raw bar, their eyes flicking towards the executive elevator. I saw a junior analyst from finance nervously shredding a cocktail napkin, her gaze fixed on the CFO. The room was a living spreadsheet of secrets, and I knew how to read every cell. Then came the moment I'd been anticipating. The MC, a relentlessly cheerful marketing manager named Dave, tapped his microphone. The feedback squeal cut through the chatter. All right, Halcyon heroes, can I get your attention, please? His voice boomed, amplified by the atrium's unforgiving acoustics. As we celebrate a record-breaking quarter, we also have a very special personal milestone to acknowledge. Please join me in giving a huge round of applause for our very own birthday girl, the sharpest mind in the building, Rowan Pierce. A wave of polite applause rippled through the crowd. I felt hundreds of pairs of eyes on me. I maintained my composure, a slight, pleasant smile fixed on my face as if I were reviewing a routine expense report. Rowan, come on up here, Dave beckoned. We've got a little surprise for you. I made my way toward the temporary stage, my heels clicking a steady, deliberate rhythm on the polished marble floor. The lights felt hot. I could see Beckett waiting near the steps, his own smile wide and impossibly charming. He was wearing the navy Tom Ford suit I'd bought him for our anniversary. He reached for my hand as I ascended the 2 short steps, his palms slick with sweat. A tell. He was nervous, but not for the reason everyone assumed. Happy birthday, babe, he whispered, his voice a low thrum meant only for me. His eyes, however, darted for a split second over my shoulder, towards the front of the crowd. Another tell. Dave handed the microphone to Beckett. The floor is yours. Beckett, I hear you have something special to say. Beckett cleared his throat, his gaze sweeping across the expectant faces of our colleagues. He looked at me, his expression a carefully constructed mask of adoration. Thank you, Dave, Rowan. Everyone knows how incredible you are. Your dedication, your intelligence, you inspire all of us. The crowd murmured in agreement. I just stood there, a silent observer at my own public execution. He took a deep breath, the classic dramatic pause, and then he turned. It was a subtle shift, a pivot of just 30 degrees, but in the focused silence of that room, it was a seismic event. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He knelt, the expensive fabric of his suit creasing at the knee, and his upturned, earnest face was directed at Tessa Vaughn. A collective gasp sucked the air from the atrium. The silence that followed was absolute, a crushing weight of disbelief and confusion. Tessa, the company's new strategic consultant, stood there, bathed in the spotlight, a perfect portrait of feigned surprise. She was wearing a white dress, a bold choice for a corporate event, a bridal choice. In the front row, I saw her father, our CEO, Lila Vaughn. He wasn't surprised at all. A smug, triumphant gleam shone in his eyes. He caught my gaze for a fleeting moment, a silent acknowledgement of his victory. He thought he had won. He had no idea he was a pawn in a much larger game. Beckett's voice, amplified and intimate, filled the void. He never once looked back at me. "Tessa," he began, his voice thick with rehearsed emotion. "I know this is sudden, but some things, some connections, they defy timelines and expectations. From the moment we truly connected in that strategy session on the 42nd floor, I knew my life's trajectory had changed. It was fate. It was synergy." He used a corporate buzzword to describe his affair. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it was almost impressive. He spoke of destiny and alignment, of shared visions for the future, painting a romantic narrative over a foundation of betrayal and deceit. He spoke as if I were not there, as if our 3 years together were a rounding error on a balance sheet he was presenting to new investors. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I simply raised the champagne flute that a server had pressed into my hand earlier. With a steady hand, I brought it close to my lips, my eyes never leaving the grotesque theater playing out before me. Then, with the tip of my fingernail, I tapped the crystal rim. Ting. It was a tiny sound, almost lost in the vastness of the atrium, but it was the only sound that mattered. It was the signal, my signal. Instantly, the brilliant lights of the stage began to dim. It wasn't a sudden blackout, but a slow, cinematic fade, drawing every eye from the couple on the stage to the growing darkness. The ambient lighting throughout the atrium followed suit, plunging the glittering party into a deep, expectant twilight. The only remaining light came from the emergency exit signs and the faint glow of the city through the glass walls. The massive LED screen that served as the backdrop for the stage, which moments before had been displaying the Halcyon Meridian logo, flickered. It went black for a single, pregnant second before a new input source took over. It was now a live feed. Whispers started to ripple through the crowd, a nervous, confused murmur that grew in volume. "What's happening? Is this part of it?" On stage, Beckett paused, the velvet ring box still open in his hand. He squinted into the darkness, confusion clouding his triumphant expression. "What's going on with the lights?" Tessa looked around, her composure finally cracking. The feigned surprise was replaced by genuine panic. I took a slow, deep breath, the cool, conditioned air filling my lungs. I could feel the vibration of hundreds of whispers against my skin, a wave of uncertainty crashing against the shore of my resolve. They thought they were the show. They were wrong. The live feed on the screen behind them stabilized. It wasn't a professional broadcast. The angle was low, the lighting was poor, and the audio was slightly distorted. It was footage from the miniature camera I had installed in the ceiling of the executive garage 2 weeks ago, a camera they thought was just a dormant motion sensor. I stepped forward into the semi-darkness, my voice calm and clear, needing no microphone. "You wanted a show?" I said, letting the words hang in the silent air. "Let's make it a show." The whispers stopped. Every single person in that room turned to look at me, their faces pale and indistinct in the gloom. The only things that were truly clear were the 2 figures trapped on stage, illuminated by the damning glow of the screen behind them, and the cold, unwavering certainty in my voice. The sound of the rising tide of scandal began, a soft wave of murmurs lapping against the glass walls of the atrium, about to become a tsunami. The screen behind them wasn't black for long. As it hummed to life, my mind rewound, not by minutes, but by 63 days. The fault line didn't appear with a sudden, violent jolt. It began as a hairline fracture, almost invisible, in a place no one else would ever look. A Q3 expense report from the Strategic Consulting Division. It was a Tuesday. I was drinking lukewarm coffee and running a routine audit, a process as meditative and mundane as breathing. Then I saw it. An invoice from a vendor I didn't recognize. Orchid Strand, LLC. The amount was significant, just under the threshold that would require executive board approval. The description was vague. Synergistic market analysis and Q3 projections. It was the kind of corporate jargon designed to be ignored. I didn't ignore it. 2 months ago, that single invoice led me down a rabbit hole. I cross-referenced the payment date with Beckett's corporate calendar. He was on a business trip to Chicago that week. A quick check of Tessa Vaughn's calendar, which as a consultant was linked to our internal system, showed her in Chicago as well, attending the same conference. Coincidence was possible. Inefficiency was probable. But my job is to eliminate the probable and confirm the factual. I dug deeper. Another invoice from Orchid Strand LLC appeared a month later, this time for brand outreach development. The payment date coincided with a weekend Beckett and Tessa had both booked as personal leave, but their corporate Amex cards showed charges from a boutique hotel in Napa Valley, the same hotel. The pieces began to click into place with cold, mechanical precision. Orchid Strand LLC had no website, no public records beyond a shell corporation registered in Delaware. It was a ghost, created for the sole purpose of funneling company money into their romantic getaways. The betrayal wasn't what stunned me. It was the sheer lack of imagination. They were embezzling from a multi-billion-dollar corporation to pay for room service and couples massages. A week after that discovery, I was working late, running a data integrity check on our M&A prospect files. It was another routine task, something to occupy my mind while the gears of my own private investigation turned. That's when I found the second, more damning piece of evidence. Buried in a mislabeled subfolder on the shared drive was a draft proposal for a hostile takeover of a smaller logistics firm, a move our board had explicitly voted against. The draft was authored by Lila Vaughn, with extensive notes from Beckett and Tessa. The linchpin of their plan was a clause I had never seen before, a provision that would grant a supermajority of voting rights to a newly formed executive committee. The members of that committee? Lila Vaughn, the CFO, Beckett Hale, and Tessa Vaughn. Her inclusion was conditional. The document stated her seat would be confirmed upon her formal and permanent familial integration into the Halcyon Meridian leadership structure. It was a bloodless corporate term for marriage. If Tessa married into the company's upper echelon, specifically to a director like Beckett, their faction would gain absolute control. My relationship wasn't just being cheated on, it was an obstacle to a boardroom coup. It was around this time that Beckett's behavior shifted. He became solicitous, almost suffocatingly attentive. He started talking about our future more, but his words were like the consulting invoices, vague, full of jargon, and ultimately meaningless. Then he came to me one evening, holding a tablet with a document pulled up. "Hey, babe," he said, kissing my temple. "Legal is rolling out a new ethics pledge for all department heads. Just a formality. Could you sign it?" I took the tablet. The document was titled, Commitment to Corporate Harmony and Ethical Conduct. It was dense with legalese, but my eyes quickly found the operative clauses. It wasn't a pledge. It was a gag order. It expanded the definition of proprietary information to include interpersonal executive dynamics and imposed crippling financial penalties for the unauthorized disclosure of information that could impact executive cohesion. He was asking me to sign a non-disclosure agreement about his own life, about our life. "Looks standard," I said, handing the tablet back to him with a placid smile. "I'll review it and sign in the morning." He looked relieved. "Great. It's just to ensure we're all on the same page. Protecting the company." "Of course," I replied. "Protecting the company is my job." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my home office, the glow of my monitor painting stripes across the darkened room, I didn't sign his pledge. Instead, I began my own documentation. I initiated a secure, encrypted backup of everything. I cloned his email archives, flagging conversations where he and Tessa discussed project deliverables on weekends. I pulled calendar data, superimposing their meeting schedules over travel itineraries. I downloaded CRM logs that showed they were accessing client files from the same IP addresses at hotels in Miami and Seattle. I took screenshots of the wire transfers to Orchid Strand LLC. I built a fortress of evidence, each file a perfectly cut stone in the wall of their undoing. The following week, a thick cream-colored envelope appeared on my desk. It was a birthday card from Tessa. The front had a picture of two champagne flutes clinking together. Inside, her looping, ostentatious handwriting filled the space. To Rowan, it read, "So excited to be working with you and Beckett. You guys are the ultimate power couple. Can't wait to celebrate your special day. You're like the big sister I never had. XOXO. Tessa." As I held the card, a familiar scent wafted from the expensive paper. It was Santal 33, the same cloying, overpriced perfume I had smelled on the passenger seat of Beckett's car a month earlier, a scent he had clumsily tried to blame on a spilled air freshener. I dropped the card into a clear evidence bag I kept in my desk for just such occasions. The plan began to form then, a cold, clear blueprint in my mind. The stage had to be public. The humiliation had to be corporate. Their ambition was their weakness, and I would use the company they sought to control as the weapon against them. The annual Q4 party, which happened to fall on my birthday, was the perfect venue. I approached Beckett 2 weeks before the event. "You know," I said, feigning casualness as we made breakfast, "the company is making a big deal about my birthday falling on the same day as the Q4 party. Dave from marketing wants to do some kind of tribute." I let out a small, dismissive laugh. "It's so cheesy, but what if you did it? It would feel more personal." His eyes lit up, an opportunity to perform. "Yeah? You'd be okay with that?" "I'd love it," I said. "You could even prepare something special, a real surprise. You can use the company's event server to upload any videos or slides. That way, it's all integrated with the main presentation. It will be seamless." He bought it completely. Seamless. I like that. A seamless surprise. The night he uploaded his surprise, a sappy, generic photo montage of himself and Tessa disguised under the file name RWN B-Day Aj Tribute, PTX. I was watching. My access as an investigator allowed me to monitor server activity without raising flags. As the file transferred, I ran a script. It was a simple, elegant piece of code that embedded a microscopic, encrypted watermark into the file's metadata. I also attached a hidden string of alphanumeric code, an identifier that linked the presentation directly to his user ID, his IP address, and his specific device. It was a digital fingerprint he could never wipe away. My final preparations were methodical. I ran a deep audit on the marketing budget for the party. There it was, buried under promotional assets and influencer outreach, an expenditure for a 5-carat diamond ring from Tiffany & Co. The purchase order was approved by the CFO and categorized as a morale-boosting romantic PR initiative to enhance employee engagement. They were using company funds to buy their engagement ring and writing it off as a marketing expense. It was a violation so flagrant, so arrogant, it made me laugh out loud in my silent office. The night before the party, I compiled everything into a single, password-protected file: the invoices, the M&A draft, the emails, the travel records, the server logs, the marketing expense report for the ring. I drafted a preliminary report, a cold, factual summary of securities fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to breach fiduciary duty. I sent the encrypted file to my personal attorney, a specialist in corporate malfeasance. The email was scheduled to be sent to the SEC's whistleblower portal at 9:30 p.m. the next day. The only way to stop it was for me to log into my secure portal and enter a cancellation code at exactly 9:25 p.m. It was a dead man's switch. If something happened to me, if they tried to silence me, the truth would still come out. In the hours leading up to the party, Beckett was a mess of nerves and excitement. He kept practicing his speech in the mirror of our apartment. "Rowan deserves the world," he'd murmur, adjusting his tie. "She's the anchor, the foundation." He spoke the words with such conviction, yet his eyes were hollow. He was rehearsing a lie, and I was his silent, smiling audience. I watched him, a strange sense of detachment washing over me. He wasn't the man I loved anymore. He was a subject of an investigation, and my investigation was about to be closed. Now, in the darkened atrium, the whispers died as the first image resolved on the giant screen. It wasn't a corporate logo. It was a grainy, low-angle shot of Beckett and the CFO in the executive garage, leaning against a black Mercedes, their faces illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lights. The hidden camera's audio crackled to life, and the CFO's voice filled the cavernous hall. "The ring is handled," he said. "Just make sure the performance is convincing. This has to look legitimate." Beckett nodded, a greedy smile on his face. "Don't worry," he said. "I've been rehearsing." The show had begun. The image on the screen was grainy, the audio laced with the low hum of the garage's ventilation system, but the words were perfectly clear. Beckett's voice, stripped of its earlier stage-managed emotion, was sharp and conspiratorial. "The ring is handled," the CFO said. "Just make sure the performance is convincing." Beckett's reply, "Don't worry, I've been rehearsing," echoed in the stunned silence of the atrium. On stage, Beckett froze, his hand still holding the open ring box. The diamond, which had seemed so brilliant moments before, now looked like a shard of cheap glass in the harsh glow of the LED screen. Tessa's face was a canvas of pure horror, her feigned surprise replaced by the stark, ugly truth of her complicity. Before the crowd could process the first revelation, the scene cut. The screen now showed a split view. On the left, a close-up of a spreadsheet, a line item highlighted in yellow. Executive Transition Bonus, BH. The number next to it had 7 figures. On the right, a video feed from a different camera. This one clearly from a phone, propped up on a desk. Beckett was sitting across from the CFO in the latter's office. "The stock options are conditional on the successful vote post-merger," the CFO's voice explained, clinical and detached. "And the merger is conditional on the vote," Beckett countered, leaning forward, "which is why the engagement is critical. Lyle needs my vote locked in through Tessa. So you get the girl, a seat on the new committee, and a 7-figure stock package, and Lyle gets his dynasty," the CFO smirked. "Win-win." The scene cut again. Now it was Tessa, sitting in that same chair in her father's office. She was laughing, holding a glass of champagne. The video was time-stamped from 3 weeks prior. "Honestly, I was worried he wouldn't go for such a public proposal," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "He's so attached to Rowan in that pathetic, comfortable way. But the special ESOP was the perfect incentive." She took a sip of champagne. "After the engagement is official, Dad will sign off on the package, Beckett gets his payday, and we get the company. It's just business." A wave of sound washed over the atrium. It started as 100 individual gasps and mutated into a roar of shock and outrage. The MC, Dave, stood by the side of the stage, his jaw slack, the microphone hanging uselessly in his hand. In the front row, Lyle Vaughn's face had turned a blotchy, apoplectic red. He spun around, his eyes wild, searching for the AV technicians in the booth at the back of the atrium. He jabbed a finger furiously at the screen, then at the power outlet, mouthing the words, "Turn it off! Kill it!" But nothing happened. The technicians, 2 junior employees from my own department who I'd personally assigned to the event, simply stared back, their faces impassive. The system was locked. I had coded the presentation with a Class A priority command string, the same level of override used for emergency building-wide security alerts. It could not be stopped from a terminal in the booth. It could only be stopped by me. I took a single, deliberate step forward. The faint light from the screen illuminated my face. I felt the weight of every stare in that room, but my focus was entirely on the three figures trapped on the stage. "Congratulations," I said, my voice cutting through the din with surgical precision. "My birthday present to you is a formal record of your felonies." As if on cue, the screen behind them shifted again, this time into a rapid-fire montage of cold, hard evidence. There was no commentary, none was needed. Cut to a high-resolution scan of an invoice from Orchid Strand LLC for synergistic market analysis. Cut to an email from Beckett to Tessa. Subject: Napa Project. Body: the workshop was incredibly productive. Confirming receipt of Orchid Strand's payment. His digital signature glowed at the bottom. Cut to a hotel folio from the Auberge du Soleil. Guest name: Beckett Hale. Room charges for 2. The dates perfectly matched the Napa Project. Cut to the draft M&A proposal. The clause about familial integration highlighted in bright red, with Lyle Vaughn's signature of approval clearly visible at the bottom. The evidence flashed across the screen, a relentless, damning rhythm of their greed and deceit. It was a confession delivered not by a human voice, but by the cold, impartial language of data. Beckett finally broke from his paralysis. He scrambled to his feet, the ring box clattering to the floor. He turned to me, his face a mask of desperation. "Rowan, this isn't what it looks like. You're misunderstanding." I held up a hand, a simple, dismissive gesture. "Save your time, Beckett." My words were like a starting gun. The spell of shocked silence broke, and the room erupted. The guests were no longer a polite corporate audience. They were spectators at a public demolition. Phones were raised, their small screens adding to the chaotic light. On the large, secondary displays flanking the atrium, a live feed of social media tags began to crawl. The hashtag someone had started an hour ago, Neon Proposal, was now trending, but it was being rapidly overtaken by a new one, Neon Reckoning. I took a slow sip of the flat champagne in my glass, my eyes fixed on Tessa. She was backing away from Beckett, her hands held up as if to ward off his toxicity. She looked small and fragile under the glare of the evidence. "Nice ring," I said, my voice calm and conversational, yet it carried across the stage. "The company paid for it, didn't it?" Her head snapped toward me, her eyes wide with panic. The accusation, so direct and public, had found its mark. She looked desperately to her father, the man who had orchestrated the whole affair. "Dad?" she whimpered, her voice barely a whisper. Lyle Vaughn didn't answer. He was busy, his hand yanking at the knot of his silk tie as if it were a noose, strangling him. He was no longer a powerful CEO. He was just a man watching his empire burn, and I was the one holding the match. I glanced at my watch. It was 9:17 p.m. The show was running perfectly on schedule. "You're probably all wondering what happens next," I said, addressing the room but looking directly at Lyle. "Well, that's the thing about internal investigations. They have external consequences." I let that hang in the air for a moment. The United States Securities and Exchange Commission has an excellent and entirely anonymous online tip portal. They received a full, encrypted data package detailing securities fraud, conspiracy, and embezzlement at Halcyon Meridian approximately 7 minutes ago. The final piece of information landed with the force of a physical blow. The murmuring stopped. The frantic typing on phones paused. This was no longer just a messy breakup or a corporate scandal. It was a federal case. The flashing hashtag on the screen seemed trivial now. The real story wouldn't be on social media. It would be in court filings and on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. Beckett stared at me, the color draining from his face. The charming, ambitious director of development was gone, replaced by a cornered, terrified man who had just realized the game was over and he had lost everything. Tessa was openly sobbing now, her mascara running in black rivulets down her cheeks. Lyle Vaughn finally stopped pulling at his tie. He simply stood, defeated, his shoulders slumped, looking at me not with hatred, but with a dawning, horrified respect for the weapon he had so foolishly underestimated. The LED screen behind them faded to black. Its work done. The only sound was the soft, rhythmic click of my heels as I turned and walked off the stage. The chaos in the atrium was a distant storm, a maelstrom of noise and light I observed from a place of absolute calm. My heart did not race. My hands did not tremble. The public detonation was merely the final, visible effect of a cause I had engineered in silence over 63 days. The real work was done in the quiet hum of servers, in the sterile logic of spreadsheets, and in the shadowed corners of the corporate machine they thought they owned. It all began with Orchid Strand, LLC. In the digital ledger of Halcyon Meridian, it was just another vendor, a ghost in the machine. But to me, it was a loose thread on a perfectly tailored suit. My investigation started with a simple query, filtering for newly onboarded vendors with high volume, low description invoices. Orchid Strand was an immediate red flag, incorporated in Delaware 6 months ago. Its digital footprint was non-existent. It was a shell, expertly crafted by our CFO, Arthur Vance, a man whose talent for financial architecture was matched only by his lack of a moral compass. The first layer was simple embezzlement. Halcyon Meridian paid Orchid Strand for consulting services that were never rendered, but skimming from the top was amateurish. I knew there was a deeper design. I initiated a forensic analysis of the payment outflows from Orchid Strand's accounts. It took a court-sealed subpoena, which I obtained under the guise of a routine foreign tax compliance audit, to get the bank records. There it was. A secondary flow of capital. The money didn't sit. Within 48 hours of each payment from Halcyon, Orchid Strand wired 70% of the funds to a private wealth management fund. The name of the fund, the Vaughn Family Heritage Trust. The transaction records were coded with nauseatingly banal descriptors like quarterly personnel event funding and executive retreat logistics. They were laundering the company's money into the CEO's family trust. But the numbers alone didn't tell the whole story. The data was a clean, sterile trail of digital theft. I needed to overlay the human element, the messy, predictable patterns of their behavior. I began mapping the dates of the payments against the travel and expense logs of our key players. The correlation was perfect. A 1-to-1 match. A payment would go to Orchid Strand on a Monday. On Wednesday, Beckett and Tessa would both be on a flight to a city where we had no official business. Hotel folios, restaurant receipts submitted for client entertainment, car rental agreements. They all placed Beckett and Tessa in the same location at the same time, living a life of luxury funded by their own fraud. My office began to look like a conspiracy theorist's den, but with verifiable proof, I printed out the money flow chart, a clean, vector-based diagram showing the path of the money from our operating budget to Lyle Vaughn's pocket. I pinned it to a large corkboard. Then, I began to attach the physical evidence, the receipt from a dinner in Miami for $800, where Beckett claimed he was meeting a supplier. I cross-referenced it with an Instagram post from one of Tessa's friends, tagging Tessa in the same restaurant on the same night. Pin, a still from a parking garage security camera in Seattle, time-stamped, showing Beckett and Tessa getting into a rental car together. He had expensed the car for a solo trip to visit a remote data center. Pin. Each piece of evidence was a nail in their collective coffin. The company within the company had a fatal weakness: arrogance. They believed they were untouchable, operating in a system they controlled, and that led them to get sloppy. I discovered just how sloppy when I audited the budget for the Q4 gala. My birthday party, tucked away in the event's financial planning, was a line item with a Priority A classification code. In Halcyon's internal language, that code was reserved for the most sensitive, off-the-books operations, hostile takeovers, C-suite terminations, projects so secret they were only discussed in shielded rooms. Attaching it to a party budget was like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. It screamed that the party itself was not just a celebration, it was a strategic objective. It was the venue for their corporate coup, and that gave me the opening I needed to turn their theater into my own. Knowing they would try to cover their tracks after their plan was executed, I moved to protect the evidence. 3 days before the party, I filed a request under my authority as head of internal investigations for a full, real-time mirror of the company's primary communication and financial servers. The request was granted by our external legal counsel. Citing a pending high-level ethics compliance review, the system began creating a perfect, untouchable copy of every log, every email, every transaction, stored on a secure off-site server. They could delete the originals, but they couldn't touch the mirror. My foresight paid off less than 24 hours later. At 11:47 p.m. the night before the party, an alert pinged on my encrypted laptop. A high-level administrative command had been initiated on the main server. Purge, logs, Auth Vance, a range 90D. Arthur Vance, the CFO, was trying to wipe the last 3 months of data. He was scrubbing the evidence of his own crime. I watched the command attempt to execute. It was blocked by the legal hold I had placed. The system returned an error message. Command failed. System lock, 401B. Investigative hold active. I took a screenshot of the failed command, the digital equivalent of catching the burglar's hand on the doorknob. With the evidence secured, my final preparations were about the audience. The spectacle in the atrium was for the masses, but the real power shift would happen in a quiet room, witnessed by the right people. I identified the 2 most powerful and, more importantly, most principled members of our board of directors, May Whitlock and Marcus Thorne. They were independent shareholders from the old guard, wealthy, unflappable, and utterly intolerant of the kind of new money corruption Lyle Vaughn represented. I didn't send them a formal meeting request. I sent them each a thick, cream-colored invitation, identical to the one Tessa had sent me. "You are cordially invited to celebrate Rowan Pierce's birthday," it read. I handwrote a personal note at the bottom of each. To May, "Your insights on corporate governance would be particularly valuable this evening." To Marcus, "I believe a significant shareholder event is scheduled to take place. Your presence would be stabilizing." They both arrived promptly at 7:30 p.m. I greeted each of them personally, away from the main flow of traffic. I handed each of them a simple, unadorned manila envelope. "Happy birthday to me," I said with a wry smile. "Please don't open this until the lights go down." Inside each envelope was a 1-page summary of the money flow chart, a printout of the Tiffany & Co. invoice for the engagement ring, and the draft M&A proposal with the familial integration clause circled in red. But there was one more item tucked at the very bottom, a sleek, black keycard. It was a top-level security pass, featureless except for a number engraved in white, 19B. As I walked away, leaving them to rejoin the party, I had set the final piece in motion. They were not just guests at a party. They were jurors I had personally selected, and I had just handed them the evidence. The key card was their summons. While the company was distracted by the fireworks of a public implosion, the real trial was about to begin in Conference Room 19B, the one place at Halcyon Meridian with no cameras, no microphones, and a direct and private elevator to the boardroom. The vote of no confidence was already on the table. They just didn't know it yet. While the atrium descended into a well-deserved pandemonium, I moved with a purpose that rendered the noise irrelevant. I located May Whitlock and Marcus Thorne near the chaos, their faces grim masks of understanding. They had opened their envelopes. Our general counsel, Elizabeth Cho, a woman whose loyalty was to the bylaws of the corporation and not to the men who temporarily ran it, met my gaze and gave a single, sharp nod. I had briefed her an hour ago. She was prepared. "This way," I said, my voice low but clear. I didn't need to say more. We bypassed the frantic guests and the stunned security guards, taking a private service elevator that opened directly onto the 19th floor. The ride up was silent. The chaos of the party faded below us, replaced by the low hum of the elevator and the unspoken weight of what was about to happen. May smoothed the front of her jacket, her expression unreadable. Marcus stared at the floor indicator, his jaw set. Elizabeth reviewed a file on her tablet. We were a small, quiet army ascending to the battlefield. The hallway on the 19th floor was a stark contrast to the gala. It was silent, deeply carpeted, and lit with soft, recessed lighting. It smelled of clean, cold air. Our footsteps made no sound. Conference room 19B was at the end of the hall, its heavy oak door shut. I used my master keycard, and the lock clicked open with an unnervingly loud sound. The room was cold. A long polished mahogany table dominated the space, reflecting the stark, modern light fixture above. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out onto the same glittering cityscape as the party below. But from this vantage point, the view felt less like a celebration and more like a clinical observation. They were already there, waiting. Lyle Vaughn and CFO Arthur Vance sat on one side of the table. They had clearly fled the atrium the moment the first video played. Seeking refuge in a place to mount their defense, their initial posture was not one of defeat, but of controlled fury. They looked like cornered predators, ready to lash out. "There you are," Lyle snarled, his voice a low growl. He stood up, leaning his knuckles on the table. "What the hell is the meaning of this? Pierce? This public circus? You'll be lucky if you're just fired. I'll have you sued for corporate sabotage. We demand a private explanation, now." Arthur Vance remained seated, his face pale but his eyes burning with a venomous glare. "This is an unsanctioned, hysterical outburst. You've exposed this company to immense liability." I ignored them. I walked to the head of the table and placed my encrypted tablet down. Elizabeth Cho took a seat to my right. I looked at May and Marcus, who calmly took their seats opposite Lyle and Arthur, creating a clear line of division down the length of the table. "There will be no private explanations," I said, my voice as cold and polished as the table between us. "This is a formal meeting." I reached into the leather portfolio I was carrying and began to place items on the table. Each one landed with a soft, definitive sound. First, I laid out the money flow chart. It was a large, color-coded printout, showing the clean, undeniable path of Halcyon Meridian's funds into Orchid Strand LLC, and from there, into the Vaughn Family Heritage Trust. "Exhibit A," I said. "Embezzlement." Next, I placed the Tiffany & Co.'s invoice next to it. The description, "Morale-boosting romantic PR initiative," was highlighted. Exhibit B, "Misappropriation of corporate assets." Finally, I placed a small digital voice recorder on the center of the table. "Exhibit C," I pressed play. The room filled with Arthur Vance's reedy voice, tinny and distorted from the recording but perfectly intelligible. "The ring is handled. Just make sure the performance is convincing," followed by Beckett's confident reply. "Don't worry. I've been rehearsing. The ring secures the vote. The vote secures the merger." I pressed stop. The silence that followed was absolute. Arthur Vance looked as if he'd been turned to stone. Lyle's face, which had been red with anger, was now ashen. The audio recording wasn't just evidence, it was a confession to the charge of vote buying, the most explicit form of corporate corruption. May Whitlock, who had been examining the documents with a terrifyingly neutral expression, looked up. She spoke first, her voice possessing the quiet authority of old money and unimpeachable integrity. "Mr. Vaughn, Mr. Vance, according to Section 4, Article 3 of the Corporate Bylaws, a special session of the board can be convened by the agreement of two independent directors in the event of credible evidence suggesting gross misconduct or breach of fiduciary duty." She looked at Marcus Thorne, who gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Mr. Thorne and I find this evidence to be more than credible. This meeting is now in session. Ms. Cho, please record the minutes." "Of course, Madam Director," Elizabeth replied, her fingers already moving across her tablet. I opened a file on my own tablet, the text glowing in the dim room. "I will now read the preliminary charges, as per the findings of the internal investigation," I stated, my tone that of a prosecutor at arraignment. "Lyle Vaughn, CEO, conspiracy to commit securities fraud, embezzlement of corporate funds through a shell corporation, and the attempted manipulation of shareholder voting power through a proposed merger conditional on an undisclosed personal conflict of interest, Arthur Vance, CFO, complicity in embezzlement, wire fraud, and the direct facilitation of a scheme to trade corporate assets for shareholder votes, Beckett Hale, Director of Development. Lyle slammed his hand on the table. Enough! You have no authority here. Pierce, you're a glorified bookkeeper. This is a witch hunt. When this is over, you will have no future, not here, not anywhere in this industry. I will personally see to it. The threat hung in the air, heavy and useless. It was the last gasp of a dying king. I didn't even look up from my tablet. My future is not your concern. Mr. Vaughn, yours, however, has been decided. It was decided this afternoon when, anticipating this exact reaction, I worked with Ms. Cho to draft Resolution 12B. Resolution 12B? Arthur stammered, his composure finally shattering. The Whistleblower Protection and Emergency Governance Mandate, Elizabeth Cho clarified, her voice devoid of emotion. It was ratified by a majority of the independent directors via secure electronic vote at 5 p.m. today. It grants Ms. Pierce full immunity and operational protection during this investigation. It also outlines the precise protocol for the temporary transfer of executive power. The future isn't something you can threaten anymore. Lyle, it's already been notarized. At that exact moment, a phone buzzed. A harsh, intrusive sound in the silent room. It was the secure landline at the end of the conference table, a direct line to the CEO's office. Everyone stared at it. After the third buzz, a red light flashing, Lyle hesitantly reached over and pressed the speaker button. "This is Vaughn." "Mr. Vaughn," a calm, unfamiliar voice said, crisp and professional. "This is Mark Corrigan from the Enforcement Division of the Securities and Exchange Commission. I hope I'm not interrupting. We received a data package a short while ago. We have a few questions. I thought we could have a friendly, informal chat before we make it official." The blood drained from Lyle Vaughn's face. He sank back into his chair, his eyes wide and vacant. The threat was no longer in the room. It was external. It was federal. It was real. Suddenly, the door to the conference room burst open. Beckett Hale stood there, his hair disheveled, his suit jacket askew. He looked wild, desperate, a man running on pure adrenaline and panic. He hadn't been summoned. He had followed his instincts to the center of the storm. "Rowan!" he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Don't do this. Please. We can fix this. Don't take it this far. Think about us." I looked at him, not with anger or hatred or even pity. I looked at him with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a specimen. He still didn't get it. He thought this was about us. I didn't speak to him. I simply gestured with my pen to an empty chair set apart from the main table, against the wall. "Mr. Hale," Elizabeth Cho said, her voice cutting through his frantic pleading, "please take a seat in the area designated for parties with a declared conflict of interest. You do not have a vote in these proceedings." Defeated, he stumbled to the chair, his pleas dying in his throat. He was no longer a director. He was just a man in a room where his fate was being decided. May Whitlock cleared her throat, bringing the focus back to the table. "Let's proceed," she said. "The first item on the agenda for this emergency session is a motion of no confidence in CEO Lyle Vaughn. Effective immediately." She looked at Marcus. "I vote aye." "Aye," Marcus said, his voice a low rumble. "The motion carries," Elizabeth announced. "The second item is a motion to place Director Beckett Hale on immediate and indefinite suspension pending the results of a full external and federal investigation, and to revoke all security and system access." "Aye," May said. "Aye," Marcus echoed. "The motion carries," Elizabeth stated, her fingers flying across the screen. "The minutes will reflect that at 9:28 p.m., the board has voted to install May Whitlock as interim CEO of Halcyon Meridian." It was over. There was no shouting, no final confrontation, just the quiet. Methodical dismantling of an empire, executed with the cold, clean precision of corporate law. The only sound in the room was the soft tapping of Elizabeth's fingers on her tablet, recording the official end of their reign. The meeting in Conference Room 19B was not an ending, it was an amputation. We had surgically removed the cancerous leadership to save the company. As May Whitlock began outlining the immediate next steps with Elizabeth and Marcus, securing digital assets, drafting an internal communication, I stood up. My work in that sterile, silent room was done. There was one final, tangible piece of evidence I needed to secure, a loose thread I had to pull in public. I rode the private elevator back down to the atrium. The doors slid open to a scene of controlled chaos. The party was officially over. Most of the junior employees and bewildered guests had been ushered out by building security. What remained was the senior leadership, the department heads, and the key players in the night's drama, all standing in stunned, silent clusters. The lights were back on, casting a harsh, unflattering glare on the debris of the celebration. Half-empty glasses, discarded canapes, and the shattered remnants of a corporate dynasty. They were still on the stage, a tableau of ruin. Lyle Vaughn was being spoken to by two grim-faced security guards, his face a mask of disbelief. The CFO, Arthur Vance, was sitting on the steps, his head in his hands, and in the center of it all stood Beckett and Tessa. He was trying to speak to her in a low, pleading whisper, but she stood rigidly, her arms wrapped around herself, staring into the middle distance. I walked toward the stage, my heels clicking on the marble floor. Every head turned to watch me. The ambient murmur of conversation died. I was no longer just Rowan Pierce, the head of internal investigations. In that moment, I was the embodiment of the company's reckoning, the quiet architect of their public disgrace. I didn't look at Beckett. I didn't acknowledge Lyle or Arthur. My focus was solely on Tessa. I stopped at the foot of the stage and looked up at her, my expression neutral, my tone purely professional. "Ms. Vaughn," I said, my voice carrying easily in the silent hall. "I need to see the ring, please." She flinched as if I had struck her, her eyes, red-rimmed and wide, finally focused on me. "What?" she stammered. "The engagement ring," I clarified, my patience unwavering. "As it was purchased with company funds under a fraudulent pretext, it is now considered an asset subject to internal audit and recovery. I need to log it into evidence." The word evidence hung in the air, cold and heavy. Beckett took a step toward me. "Rowan, for God's sake, this is a formal investigation, Mr. Hale." I cut him off without looking at him. "And you are a subject of it. I suggest you remain silent." He recoiled, the fight draining out of him. All eyes were on Tessa, on her left hand, which she was subconsciously pressing against her stomach. The diamond caught the light, a brilliant, lonely star in the wreckage. Slowly, reluctantly, she pulled the ring from her finger. It left a pale, indented mark on her skin. She held it out to me in her trembling palm. I ascended the 2 steps onto the stage and took the ring from her. It felt heavy, cold. It was a beautiful piece, a classic Tiffany setting with a princess-cut diamond that was obscenely large, but I wasn't interested in its aesthetics. I turned it over in my fingers, tilting it to catch the light on the inner band. "What are you doing?" Lyle demanded, his voice hoarse. I held the ring up, squinting slightly as if examining a fine detail. Then, I read the inscription aloud, my voice clear and measured, each word a hammer blow. HM-promo Q4. A fresh wave of gasps rippled through the remaining audience of senior managers. I wasn't finished. Followed by an alphanumeric string, INV MKT 90210. I paused, letting the implications sink in. The invoice number. From the edge of the stage, Marcus Thorne, who had followed me down, spoke, his deep voice resonating with the full authority of the board. "I am the ranking member of the Finance Committee. I have never seen, nor would I ever approve, an expenditure of this nature for promotional purposes. This is outright fraud." His words sealed it. It was no longer my accusation. It was the board's official position. Tessa took a stumbling step back, away from Beckett, her face a mask of panic denial. "I didn't know," she whispered, looking wildly around the room, pleading with the silent jury of her colleagues. "I swear, I didn't know. I thought he bought it for me." Her betrayal of him was swift and absolute. She was cutting him loose to save herself. Beckett's face flushed a deep, painful crimson, cornered, abandoned. He stammered. It was just a creative idea, a branding synergy." "A creative idea," I repeated, the words dripping with ice. I looked from the ring in my hand to his pathetic, crumbling face. This man, who had planned to trade me for a seat at the table, was now defending the theft of a ring as a branding synergy. I reached into my portfolio and pulled out a clear plastic evidence bag with a chain of custody label. I dropped the ring inside. It landed with a soft, final clink. I peeled the adhesive strip and folded the top over, sealing it shut. I took a pen from my pocket and signed my name on the tamper-proof seal, dating and timing it. I had just processed the central piece of evidence in a federal fraud case in front of a live audience. That was when Arthur Vance seemed to find his voice. He pushed himself to his feet and walked toward me, his expression one of weary pragmatism. The fight was gone, replaced by the instinct of a dealmaker looking for an angle. "All right, Rowan," he said, his voice a low, conspiratorial murmur. "You've made your point. You've won. We can negotiate a severance, a generous one, for everyone. We can contain this before it gets any further." He was offering me a bribe. He was trying to settle a felony like it was a contract dispute. He still believed that everything, even this, had a price. I looked at him, a flicker of something that might have been pity in my eyes. I turned my head slightly, just enough to meet his gaze directly. "Of course, we can negotiate. Arthur," I said, my voice soft, almost gentle. "The negotiation starts with you signing your resignation letter." He stared at me, confused. "What?" "Effective immediately, unconditional," I continued. "That's the opening offer. Take it or leave it, right now." As I finished the sentence, a low whirring sound started up from the corner of the room, near the now abandoned bar. It was the portable office printer the event staff had set up. A single sheet of paper was slowly, inexorably sliding out of the machine. Every eye in the room followed the motion. The page settled into the output tray, the ink still warm. On it, beneath the halcyon meridian letterhead, were the clear, bolded words: "Letter of resignation, Arthur Vance, Chief Financial Officer." I had drafted it that afternoon. I had routed it to the printer from my tablet in the elevator on my way down. It was waiting for his signature. The negotiation was over before it had even begun. The printer's whirring faded, leaving a silence that was more profound than the earlier stunned quiet. Arthur Vance stared at the single sheet of paper in the output tray, the bold-faced letter of resignation, a stark, black-and-white finality. He looked at me, his eyes searching for a different exit, a hidden door in the airtight case I had built around him. He found none. He looked at Marcus Thorne, who stood impassively, his expression offering neither sympathy nor condemnation, only the cold calculus of corporate necessity. With a sigh that seemed to drain the last of the fight from his body, Arthur walked over to the printer. He picked up the page, his movements slow and defeated. I produced a pen from my portfolio, a simple, black ballpoint, not the expensive fountain pen he was used to, and held it out to him. He took it, his hand surprisingly steady as he scribbled his signature on the line I had so thoughtfully provided. He didn't date it. I had already typed in today's date for him. Efficiency was paramount. He slid the paper across a nearby table to Elizabeth Cho, who picked it up, reviewed the signature, and placed it neatly into a folder marked Executive Transition, Immediate. The first incision was complete. The moment the signed letter was in Elizabeth's possession, my fingers moved across the screen of my tablet, I opened a secure messaging app connected directly to our head of IT security, a man I trusted implicitly. My message was 3 lines of pre-written code. Initiate protocol bar 12B. Suspend user, Hail, B, all access, blacklist vendor, ID Orchid, SLLC. I hit send. Less than a second later, I received a one-word reply. Executed. Somewhere deep in the server farms in the building's sub-basement, a series of commands were running. Beckett Hale's digital ghost was being exorcised from Halcyon Meridian. His keycard would no longer open any doors. His login credentials would be rejected. His corporate email account was now a digital tomb, frozen and archived for legal review. Simultaneously, the vendor account for Orchid Strand LLC was being flagged, locked, and all pending invoices voided. The artery they had used to bleed the company dry was now clamped shut, clean, precise, irreversible. My next action was to control the narrative. Panic was a contagion, and my job was to contain the outbreak. I opened a draft email I had written the day before. The subject line was calm. An important message regarding corporate governance. The body was brief, professional, and reassuring. To all Halcyon Meridian employees. This evening, the Board of Directors initiated a comprehensive integrity review to ensure our company's operations continue to adhere to the highest ethical and legal standards. This process is being undertaken to safeguard the long-term health and stability of our organization. We want to assure you that this review will not impact our day-to-day operations. All projects will continue as planned, and there will be no disruption to payroll or scheduled compensation. Further information regarding leadership updates will be shared in the coming days. We thank you for your continued dedication and professionalism. Sincerely, the Office of the Board of Directors. I attached May Whitlock's newly authorized digital signature and sent it, across the atrium, and in the homes of thousands of employees. Phones and laptops would be lighting up with the same message. It was a carefully constructed statement. It confirmed a serious event without providing details for gossip, and it addressed the primary concern of any employee, their paycheck. Next, I stepped away from the crowd and dialed our head of communications, Eleanor Vance, no relation to Arthur, a fact she would be very grateful for tonight. She picked up on the first ring, her voice tight with anxiety. Rowan? What in God's name is happening? My phone is blowing up with calls from reporters. Eleanor, I said, my voice low and steady, you are to issue one statement and one statement only. You will not deviate from this script by a single word. Are you ready? Ready, she breathed. The statement is, Halcyon Meridian is committed to the highest standards of corporate integrity. The Board of Directors is taking proactive steps to ensure the company's governance reflects these values. We will have no further comment at this time. That's it. You repeat it to every single inquiry. No speculation, no emotion, no off the record. Understood, she said, a note of relief in her voice. A clear directive was a lifeline in a crisis. What about Lyle and Beckett? The statement covers all inquiries, I repeated. Thank you. Eleanor, I ended the call. The external firewall was now in place. I walked back to where May, Marcus, and Elizabeth were conferring. May looked up as I approached. Her face was set with a grim determination, but her eyes held a flicker of something new, the weight of command. The board's vote in 19B has been formally ratified and time-stamped in the corporate ledger, Elizabeth informed me, holding up her tablet. May Whitlock is officially Interim Chief Executive Officer of Halcyon Meridian, effective 9:28 p.m. As per Resolution 12B, the Whistleblower Protection Clause is now active, May added, looking at me. Your name and role in triggering this investigation are now legally shielded information, classified at the highest level of board confidentiality. You are protected. Rowan. Thank you, May, I said. It wasn't an emotional exchange. It was a necessary confirmation of the rules of engagement I had established. My final procedural step for the evening was the handover. I pulled out my own secure hard drive, a small, solid-state device containing the complete, unalterable data package I had compiled. It was the mirrored server data, the audio files, the financial records, the screenshots of the failed log purge. It was the entire case, tied up with a digital ribbon. I connected it to my tablet and initiated a secure encrypted transfer to the SEC contact, Mark Corrigan. Using the direct communication channel he had established, the progress bar filled quickly. A small pop-up appeared. Transfer complete. Chain of custody verified. I ejected the drive and placed it in my portfolio. The evidence was no longer just mine. It belonged to the federal government. A strange quiet had settled over the atrium. The last of the senior leadership was now dispersing. Their faces a mixture of shock, fear, and in a few cases, a grim satisfaction. A cleaning crew had begun to discreetly clear away the glasses. Soft, instrumental music, the kind played in expensive hotel lobbies, was now being piped through the sound system, a surreal soundtrack to the corporate carnage. The internal messaging systems, however, were on fire. I could see people staring at their phones, the rapid-fire succession of notifications lighting up their faces. The digital hive was processing the coup. As I stood there, taking in the aftermath of the clean cut, my own phone vibrated in my hand. It was a text message from a number I knew by heart, but had already resolved to delete. It was from Beckett. "Give me one chance to talk, in private." It was a pathetic, predictable appeal to a history he had incinerated on that stage. He thought there was still a private, a space where our personal connection could override his professional and criminal transgressions. He believed he could still negotiate with the woman whose heart he had broken, not understanding that he was now dealing with the investigator who had just dismantled his life. I typed my reply. It took less than 5 seconds. "You already did, in front of the entire company." I hit send, then I blocked his number. The cut was complete. There would be no stray threads. Despite my explicit final text message, I knew he would try one last time. Predictability was his fatal flaw. Blocking his number was a procedural step, not a shield. He knew where I would be. I found my way to the executive terrace on the 25th floor, a secluded balcony reserved for the C-suite, a place Beckett had always loved for the way it made him feel above the city, above the rules. The cool night air was a relief after the recycled, super-chilled atmosphere of the office. It smelled of distant rain and city ozone. The wind was gentle, a soft, persistent pressure that tugged at the hem of my black dress and whispered through my hair. It felt like the world breathing a slow, steady sigh after a terrible fever had broken. He was already there, leaning against the cold glass railing, a silhouette against the sprawling nebula of Westbrook Heights. He didn't turn as I approached, but I saw his shoulders tense. I stopped a few feet away, leaving a chasm of empty space between us. The only sound was the wind and the faint, distant hum of traffic from the streets far below. He finally turned. In the dim light filtering from the offices behind us, he looked hollowed out. The charm had been sandblasted away, leaving behind a raw, desperate fear. His Tom Ford suit, which had looked so powerful on stage, now seemed like a costume he had forgotten to take off. "I needed to see you," he began, his voice raspy, stripped of its usual confident cadence. "Alone. You had your chance to speak to me. Beckett, you chose a very public forum." My voice was even, devoid of the emotion he was likely hoping to provoke. There was no anger left, only a vast, cold clarity. Anger requires energy, an investment. He was no longer worth the expenditure. "That wasn't me. That was Lyle," he said, taking a hesitant step forward. "He put me in an impossible position. He said the merger, my future, everything was riding on it. He leveraged Tessa, the whole thing. He forced my hand." The excuse was so weak, so utterly transparent, that it was almost insulting. He was trying to reframe his ambition as victimization. I didn't move. I simply tilted my head, my eyes holding his. "And the proposal? The words you rehearsed? The ones about destiny on the 42nd floor? Did Lyle force those too?" He flinched, the direct hit landing squarely. He had no answer for that. No script. He changed tactics, his hands fumbling in his jacket pocket. He pulled out the small, velvet box from Tiffany's. It was empty now, a dark, hollow mouth. He held it out to me like a pathetic offering. "I made the wrong choice," he whispered, his voice cracking. "It was a catastrophic mistake. Rowan, I see that now, but it doesn't change the truth. I still love you." The words, once the foundation of my world, now sounded alien, a language I no longer understood. They were just sounds, empty of meaning, deployed as a last-ditch strategy to salvage a catastrophic loss. "No, you don't," I replied, my voice quiet but absolute. "You don't love me. You love power, and your catastrophic mistake was assuming I didn't have any of my own." The truth of that statement settled between us, stark and undeniable. He had never seen me as a player, only as a high-value asset, a supportive and intelligent partner who made him look good. He had mistaken my quiet competence for passivity. He had never once considered that the woman who audited the company's secrets might be capable of keeping her own. His face crumpled, the last of his bravado dissolved, replaced by a raw, pleading desperation. This was the part of the negotiation he truly understood. Begging. "Please," he said, stepping closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Don't let this be everything. We can keep the personal part of this quiet. My career, Rowan, everything I've worked for will be gone. Just tell them it was a professional disagreement. You don't have to ruin me completely." He was asking me, the woman he had publicly and professionally humiliated, to protect his reputation. The sheer narcissistic audacity of it was breathtaking. "My confidentiality obligations are to the company and the board. Beckett," I said, my tone clinical. "The same obligations detailed in the commitment to corporate harmony. Pledge you asked me to sign. You should have read the fine print." As if summoned by the mention of his co-conspirator, my phone vibrated in my hand. I glanced down, a text from a number I didn't have saved, but I knew who it was. "This is Tessa. Please don't ruin my life. I'll do anything." Her plea was as pathetic as his, a child's appeal to have the consequences of her actions erased. I typed a quick reply, my thumbs moving with detached efficiency. "You're a 30-year-old woman who made a calculated business decision. You chose to be a part of this party. Own it." I sent the message and slipped the phone back into my pocket, my attention returning to the man in front of me. He looked utterly lost. "I have something for you," I said. I reached into the portfolio I was still carrying and pulled out a simple, silver picture frame. It was the one that had sat on my desk for 3 years, a photo of us smiling on a beach in the Hamptons. But the photo was gone. The frame was empty, a blank, silver rectangle reflecting the distorted lights of the city. It was a void where a memory used to be. I held it out to him. "I believe this is yours now." He stared at the empty frame, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine pain in his eyes. The data, the fraud, the SEC, those were abstract threats. This was real. This was the tangible evidence of what he had truly lost. He didn't take it. His hands remained frozen at his sides. I placed it on the wide railing between us. It was then that a new light appeared in the darkness below. In the vast asphalt expanse of the executive parking lot, a black sedan with government plates, which had been parked unobtrusively in a far corner, flashed its interior lights. Just for a moment, it was a signal, a confirmation. Mark Corrigan and his team were on site. The friendly, informal chat was over. Beckett's eyes followed my gaze down to the car. He saw the official silhouette, the lack of commercial markings. He understood. His body went rigid. He gripped the cold metal of the railing, his knuckles turning white. I could see him trembling, a slight, uncontrollable tremor that ran through his entire body. It wasn't the wind, it was the cold, terrifying arrival of consequence. I had nothing left to say to him. The investigation was closed. The relationship was terminated. The last conversation was over. I turned to leave, my work here, and with him, finally and completely done. As I reached the heavy glass door leading back inside, I paused. I looked back at him, a silhouette of a man clinging to the edge of his ruined world. And I gave myself the last word. Happy birthday to me. I didn't wait for a reply. I stepped back into the silent, brightly lit hallway and pulled the heavy door shut. It closed with a soft, satisfying click. The sound of a deadbolt sliding securely into place. It was the sound of a full stop. The world did not feel different when I woke up. The sun rose at its designated time, casting a pale, gentle light through the blinds of my bedroom. The air was cool and still. There was no lingering scent of champagne or corporate collapse. There was only the quiet, unremarkable beginning of a new day. My birthday. I laced up my running shoes, the familiar ritual a grounding force. Outside, the city was still waking up. A thin, ethereal mist clung to the ground in the park, muffling the sounds of traffic and making the world feel soft-edged and new. I started to run, my feet finding their rhythm on the damp pavement, my breath pluming in the cool air. It was just me, the path, and the steady, percussive beat of my own heart. But the silence was an illusion. In the pocket of my running jacket, my phone was a live wire, a conduit to the chaos I had unleashed. It vibrated incessantly, a frantic, desperate pulse against my hip. I didn't need to look at it to know what the messages were. They would be a toxic cocktail of threats from Lyle's remaining loyalists, rambling apologies from colleagues who had stood by and watched, and desperate attempts at negotiation from third-party lawyers representing Beckett and Arthur. I imagined them all, a chorus of the damned, trying to undo what had been irrevocably done. I let the phone buzz. It was just noise, the dying echo of a world I had just finished dismantling. I focused on my breathing, on the feeling of the cool air in my lungs, on the clean, forward motion of my body. When I returned to my apartment, slick with sweat and feeling more alive than I had in months, I finally looked at the phone. The screen was a chaotic mosaic of notifications. I ignored them all, scrolling until I found the two that mattered. The first was a private email from May Whitlock, sent from her personal account at 5:17 a.m. It was characteristically brief. Subject: Morning. Rowan. Thank you. The cleanup is underway. Let's get to work. May. That was all. No effusive praise, no dramatic recap, just a clean, professional acknowledgement and a pivot to the future. It was exactly what I expected from her, and it was exactly what I needed. We weren't celebrating a victory, we were beginning a restoration. The second was an official company-wide announcement from Human Resources, sent just a few minutes before. The subject line was Announcement, the Halcyon Meridian Integrity Initiative. The email detailed the formation of a new, independent corporate ethics and compliance program. It was designed to be a permanent, powerful oversight body within the company, with a mandate to ensure transparency and accountability at all levels. The final paragraph was the one that mattered most to me. We are pleased to announce that Rowan Pierce will be leading this new initiative, effective immediately. In her new role as Chief Integrity Officer, Ms. Pierce will have direct, unrestricted access to the Board of Directors and will operate with its full and unconditional authority. It wasn't just a promotion. It was a coronation. They had given me the keys to the kingdom, not as a reward, but because they knew I was the only one they could trust not to burn it down. I walked into my kitchen and started the coffee machine. The aroma of dark roast beans filled the quiet apartment. While it brewed, my eyes fell on the thick, cream-colored envelope propped up against my fruit bowl. Tessa's birthday card. You're like the big sister I never had. I picked it up, the expensive cardstock feeling slick and fraudulent in my fingers. I didn't open it again. I simply tore it in half. The sound a crisp, satisfying rip in the morning silence. Then I tore the halves into quarters. I let the pieces flutter from my hand into the recycling bin. I poured my coffee. It tasted richer, stronger than it had the day before. I sat at my small kitchen table and opened my laptop. The internet was, as expected, a firestorm. The hashtag #NeonReckoning was the #1 trend on Twitter. Financial news sites had already published preliminary stories, citing sources close to the board about the sudden executive shakeup. Someone had recorded the last thing I had said on stage. "My birthday present to you is a formal record of your felonies," and the quote was now a meme, plastered over screenshots of Beckett's horrified face. I was the anonymous architect, my name still protected, but my words had taken on a life of their own. An internal update from HR provided a neat, bloodless summary of the casualties. Lyle Vaughn had been officially suspended by the board pending the outcome of the federal investigation. Tessa Vaughn had submitted her resignation, effective immediately. Citing personal reasons, Beckett Hale had also resigned. His departure was framed as a voluntary decision, a final, pathetic attempt to preserve a shred of dignity he had not earned. My team, the small, dedicated group of forensic accountants and data analysts in the Internal Investigations Unit, had been silent, awaiting my lead. I sent them a short email. Subject: Next steps. Team: There will be no victory laps. We are not celebrating. We simply did our job. I will be in touch later this morning to outline the transition to the new integrity initiative. Stay focused. Rowan. Just as I hit send, my apartment buzzer rang. It was a courier with a small, lightweight parcel. I signed for it and brought it inside. It was a simple brown cardboard box. Inside was the black velvet box from Tiffany & Company. I opened it. The space where the ring had been was empty, of course, but there was something else inside. Something I had slipped into the evidence bag before handing it over to the legal team for logging. It was a small, folded piece of paper. I unfolded it. On it, I had written 4 words in my own precise, clear script. Property of HM, return to legal. It was the final entry in the ledger, the closing of a case. The ring wasn't a romantic token, it was a misappropriated asset, and it had been returned to its rightful owner, the company its purchase was intended to defraud. I closed the laptop. The constant barrage of news alerts and social media chatter felt distant, irrelevant. I walked into my living room and silenced my phone, turning off all notifications. The sudden quiet was a balm. I scrolled through the music library and found a piece by Debussy. Clair de Lune, a simple, elegant melody my mother used to play on the piano when I was a child. As the first soft, clear notes filled the room, I looked around, the apartment, which had sometimes felt small and confining over the past few months, a cage where I paced with my secrets and my anger, suddenly felt spacious. The morning light poured in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It felt clean. It felt free. My laptop chimed, a single, soft notification I had forgotten to disable. It was a calendar reminder. The screen lit up with a new entry. One May must have added herself. 10 Hunquag a.m. Meeting, building a new culture. Attendees, M. Whitlock, R. Pierce. A new job, a new CEO, a new company. I looked at the invitation. At the bottom of the screen were 2 buttons: decline and join. I took one last sip of my coffee, the taste sharp and clear on my tongue. Then, I reached out and clicked the button. Join. The 10:00 a.m. meeting was not held over a video call. It was held in conference room 19B, the same room. The air had been scrubbed clean, but the memory of the previous night's confrontation was etched into the polished surface of the mahogany table, a ghost of a battle scene. Now, in the crisp, clear light of morning, it was no longer a war room, it was a blank slate. May Whitlock sat at the head of the table, the seat Lyle Vaughn had once occupied. I stood at the podium, my laptop connected to the room's main projector. There was no one else present. This was not a meeting for a committee. It was the founding of a new state. On the massive screen that filled the wall behind May, my first slide was projected. It contained no charts, no graphs, no corporate imagery, just 5 words in a clean, sans serif font, black on a stark white background. Integrity isn't a slogan, it's a deadbolt. The old model was based on trust, I began, my voice even and calm in the quiet room. We trusted our executives to be ethical. We trusted our managers to be honest. We trusted our systems to be sufficient. That trust was misplaced. It was a flimsy screen door, easily kicked in. The new model will not be based on trust. It will be based on verification, on unblinking oversight, on systems so rigorous and transparent that they don't just discourage unethical behavior, they make it structurally impossible. We are not writing a mission statement. We are changing the locks. As I spoke, the heavy oak door to the conference room swung open. Our general counsel, Elizabeth Cho, entered. The morning sun poured in from the hallway behind her, a brilliant shaft of light that cut across the room and illuminated the long, empty table. For a moment, I saw the ghost of last night, Lyle's apoplectic face, Arthur's defeated slump, Beckett's desperate plea, all vaporized in the clean, unforgiving light of a new day. The battlefield had been sanitized. Elizabeth placed a thin folder on the table in front of May and a single document in front of me before taking a seat. She said nothing. Her presence was purely procedural. I walked from the podium to a section of the wall that looked like simple wood paneling. I pressed a specific point, and a near-invisible seam appeared. A heavy steel door swung silently inward, revealing the legal department's secure vault. It was a place of last resort, fireproof, floodproof, and shielded from any electronic interference. It was where the company's most vital secrets were kept. From my portfolio, I took the sealed, plastic evidence bag, the ring inside, the one purchased with stolen funds to seal a corrupt bargain, caught the light one last time. It was just an object now, a cold piece of carbon and metal stripped of all its symbolic power. It was no longer a promise of love or a key to a corporate kingdom. It was just Exhibit A. I placed the bag on a designated shelf inside the vault. Then, with both hands, I swung the heavy steel door shut. I turned the large, mechanical tumbler, the series of powerful, definitive clicks echoing in the silent room. Each click was a punctuation mark, each one a final word. The past was no longer just over. It was interred. I returned to the table. May was looking at the folder Elizabeth had brought her. She opened it, revealing a single, crisp document. Resolution 2025-01. May read the title aloud, her voice ringing with a newfound authority. The formal ratification of the Halcyon Meridian Integrity Initiative, granting its Chief Integrity Officer full, independent, and unrestricted access to all company records, personnel, and operations. She picked up a heavy black fountain pen, her own, not one of the cheap plastic ones from the supply closet. She uncapped it, the motion deliberate and sure. She signed her name at the bottom of the page. The stroke of the nib on the thick paper was the only sound in the room. A sharp, scratching whisper that was writing the first sentence of a new chapter. She was no longer the interim CEO. She was the CEO. Then, it was my turn. I looked down at the single sheet of paper Elizabeth had placed before me. It was a standard HR document, a form I had seen hundreds of times, but this one had been customized. The title read, Declaration of Professional and Personal Dissociation. It was a legal firewall, a document formally stating that due to the events of the previous night and the ongoing federal investigation, all professional and personal contact between myself and Beckett Hale was to be permanently severed. It forbade him from contacting me, from entering my designated workspace, and from referencing any past personal association in a professional context. It was a restraining order written in the language of corporate policy. It was the clean cut, notarized. I picked up my own pen and signed my name on the line. My signature was firm, a simple, declarative stroke of ink. I did not hesitate. There was no sadness, no regret. There was only the quiet, efficient finality of closing a loophole. The small, black dome of the internal security camera in the corner of the room, the silent, unblinking eye that recorded everything, captured the final, definitive image. It saw me, standing straight, my back to the wall of windows. It saw my hands resting on the table, palms down. It saw the empty space on my left ring finger, a space that was not waiting for anything. It was just empty, clean, unburdened. I looked at May, and she gave me a single, sharp nod of acknowledgement. The work was done. The new day had truly begun. I said the words quietly, a whisper meant only for me, a final closing entry in my own personal ledger. The best birthday present is the truth. The screen cuts to black. The very last sound is the crisp, scratching whisper of May Whitlock's fountain pen as she signs her name to the future. No post-credit scene. No what happened next. No moral. The end. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let's connect. Feel free to share your thoughts on Rowan's Revenge. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. And to help this story reach even more listeners, please support it by hitting that hype button. Your support means the world.